A5, the A52 Nottingham and Derby exit, of course. On the M16 Greater Manchester, the clockwise exit is partly blocked at junction 17 at Prestwich following an accident. In Essex, the A12 is partly blocked northbound on the Whittam bypass, northeast of Chelmsford for emergency repairs. The A2 is closed out of London at the Kidbrooke interchange for recovery work following a big fire this morning. In South London at Croydon, the A232 Shirley Road closed southbound after a manhole collapsed. And in East Sussex at Rye, the A268, the Rye Road closed for accident investigation work. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
You could be the next Great British Giveaway winner with a whopping £36,000 in tax-free cash in your bank account. Imagine getting the winning phone call for that.
£30,000 cash? Oh my God, I'm going to cry.
Yes, you see, that is absolutely fantastic.
Look at the moon.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
For another chance to win £36,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2, or post your name and number to GB08 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 25th of October. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
The king of breakfast TV is back. That's right. Britain's favourite TV host, Eamon Holmes, returns to Britain's hottest breakfast programme. Breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome to Dewbs & Co. Now, you might have recognised I'm not Michelle Dewberry, I'm Tom Harwood standing in, but this is what's on tonight's programme. As the country loses one of its greatest stars of stage and screen, we'll be looking back at the life and legacy of Dame Maggie Smith. And as 2 13-year-old boys are jailed for a minimum of 8.5 years for the machete murder of Sean Sashihei, is it time parents were held legally responsible when their underage children commit violent offences? Sir Keir Starmer met with Donald Trump yesterday, but will the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary's historic, uncharitable comments about the former president come back to haunt them? And Patrick Christys has sat down for an exclusive interview with a victim of the disgraced late Harrods boss, Mohammed Al-Fayed. Looking ahead to tonight as the latest in a long line of sex abuse scandals allegedly involving the rich and famous, I'm asking, can rich people simply get away with anything? And it's revealed that environmentally conscious Gen Zers are the worst for recycling. Yes, really. Just as 2 Just Stop Oil activists are handed prison sentences for vandalising Van Gogh's sunflowers, is the Gen Z green dream dying out? Well, that's all to come in the next hour. Remember, submit your thoughts to gbnews.com/yoursay, but before all of that, it's your very latest news headlines with Lewis Mackenzie.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon. It's 6 o'clock. I'm Lewis Mackenzie here in the GB newsroom. Multiple explosions have been heard in Beirut after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to keep fighting Hezbollah in Lebanon. These are live pictures of where the explosion just happened. The IDF say they have conducted a precise strike on the central headquarters of Hezbollah, embedded under residential buildings in the heart of the city. It's been reported that Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah, was the supposed target of the strike. We'll bring you the very latest as it happens. And earlier on today, Sir Keir Starmer called for a ceasefire in the region, saying escalation serves no one. Speaking at the United Nations, the Prime Minister implored the two sides to step back from the brink. Sir Keir also discussed the importance of a ceasefire deal with his Lebanese counterpart. It concludes Starmer's three-day trip to New York after attending the annual meeting of world leaders. Britain's youngest knife murderers, who were 12 years old when they killed Sean Sasahi with a machete, have both been sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8.5 years. The killers were convicted in June of murdering the 19-year-old who was stabbed in the heart and suffered a fractured skull in November of last year. They're the youngest convicted murderers in the UK since Jamie Bolger's killers, Robert Thompson and John Venables, back in 1993. Barristers representing alleged victims of Mohammed al-Fayed say they are now 60 survivors and they have credible evidence of abuse at Fulham Football Club. The former Harrods and Fulham FC owner is accused of multiple sexual assaults after a BBC investigation was published last week. A spokesman for Justice for Harrods Survivors, a group of barristers representing the alleged victims, says there has been enormous response to the investigation. One of al-Fayed's alleged victims has spoken exclusively to GB News.
He had this look in his eyes, and I'll never forget it. It was like a monstrous, I'm going to get what I want from you. I don't care how you feel. And I do think because it was in a public place, so to speak, he would have gone further had he could. I think he was worried somebody might come in or I might have started screaming or something like that. So he made his exit pretty quickly. And I think he would have definitely raped me if he'd had half the chance, 100%.
And you can watch the full interview of that on Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. Now, more than 180 flood warnings are in place across England after days of heavy rain. Images posted on social media also show tracks at a station in Shropshire completely submerged. The Met Office says northern parts of central England and Wales have been hit the hardest. And some sad news for you now. Dame Maggie Smith, known for Harry Potter films and Downton Abbey, has died at the age of 89. Her family released a statement saying she passed away peacefully in hospital early this morning. She leaves 2 sons and 5 loving grandchildren who are devastated by the loss of their extraordinary mother and grandmother. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines. I'm Lewis Mackenzie. More from me in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Tom Harwood. Joining me until 7 o'clock is my panel, firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embry and the former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Moylan. And of course, you are involved in this programme too. Do get your views in at gbnews.com/your say on all of the topics that we're debating and discussing this evening. But before we get into all of that, just as the show was starting, reports have begun to claim that Lebanon's Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was the target of the latest Israeli strike on Beirut's southern suburbs. And the Israeli military is currently in the process of determining whether he, that is the leader of Hezbollah, was hit or not. All of that's according to Israeli sources. It comes just hours after Benjamin Netanyahu said at the United Nations that negotiations on a ceasefire in Lebanon will continue, despite his insistence that the IDF maintains its offensive against Hezbollah. We're looking at live pictures now from Beirut. Let's go live to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, to learn what has happened in the last hour or so. Mark.
Well, a very significant development with a series, multiple explosions, which the Israeli Defense Forces confirmed was aimed at targeting the Hezbollah terror group's command and control centre, buried deep underground under a residential area in southern Beirut, the Lebanese capital, a Hezbollah stronghold. That has resulted in the collapse of multiple residential buildings down into the crater created by these, we're told, bunker-busting bombs, which range anything from 5,000 to 30,000 pounds and are designed to penetrate deep into the ground, up to 30 metres, to go after these underground command centres. So it was a series of explosions that happened just after 6 p.m. local time in the Lebanese capital. There are reports of very significant civilian casualties in the area as well, given that this was under a residential complex. Now, we understand that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, gave the go-ahead for this strike while he was in New York, of course, addressing the United Nations, the United... Israel would not stop its efforts to try to ensure that Hezbollah can fire no more missiles, drones, and indeed rockets into northern Israel. They want to return the 70,000 residents of northern Israel back to their homes. They've been displaced in other parts of Israel for up to a year now. As you mentioned in your introduction, there are sources suggesting that the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was the target of this coordinated airstrike. There are, as you're continuing to look at the images from the scene of what is a frantic rescue effort, the very latest news that we're now getting through from the Reuters news agency, quoting a source close to Hezbollah, said that the leader of the terror group Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, is alive. That's the only information that Reuters is putting out so far, quoting a source close to Hezbollah, saying that Hassan Nasrallah is alive. But of course, as you're seeing from those pictures there, the devastation in that area of southern Beirut, many others tonight are not alive.
Well, Mark White, thank you so much for that report. As and when we can confirm anything with regards to the status of the leader of Hezbollah, we'll be back with you, of course. Thanks for joining us. Now, earlier today, back in this country, we got the sad news that the legendary actress Dame Maggie Smith passed away, aged 89. Dame Maggie began her career in the 1950s, starring in Shakespeare classics on the stage, moving on to television and film, winning the Oscar for Best Actress for the prime of Miss Jean Brodie in 1969, winning other awards like Golden Globes and even the Olivier Award, but also playing Professor McGonagall, of course, in the Harry Potter franchise, and the Dowager Countess Lady Violet Crawley in Downton Abbey. So, what do my panel think of her legacy? Paul Embry, we're going to start with you.
I think she was a national treasure, really, wasn't she? And probably an international treasure as well. My wife is a huge fan of Downton Abbey, and she was sad when I texted her the news today. But she was famous for Downton Abbey and for Harry Potter towards the end of her career. But actually, you know, had a very illustrious career and won the Oscar in, I think it was 1968, for the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, the film. And when someone of that esteem passes on, someone who commands the affection that she did in the national consciousness, then I think it's always a sad day. And we don't seem, without sort of being terribly old-fashioned about it, we don't seem to have the talent in entertainment, the arts, I think, when it comes to acting and films and so on, and lots of other areas as well that we once did. And people like her really, really stand out.
Yeah, people who can command both the stage and the screen. It seems like we don't have that so much.
I think that's right, and the huge respect of the audience and the critics and so on. But of course, she was a mother and a grandmother as well, and that needs to be remembered. The biggest loss will be for a family, of course.
Well, I want to bring in the words of Simon, who's written in. Hi, Simon. Thanks for joining us this evening. He said how sad it is this country has lost one of our best actors, Dame Maggie Smith. She brought so much joy and entertainment to all those who watched her of all ages and will be sadly missed. And Daniel, I suppose for that, there is sort of every generation since the 1950s and 60s. Each generation has been introduced to Dame Maggie Smith in a new way.
Yes, and in a better way, I think, when she was younger, because like so many of our great actors and actresses, towards the end of their lives, when they're really famous, they take the money in order to do stuff that really isn't of the quality that they were doing when they were young. So however much we love her in Harry Potter or even in Downton Abbey, I mean, she was sort of camping it up for the money, really, and she was very good at that. Well, when you go back to the early part of her career, that's when the real genius was. And Paul has already mentioned the Oscar she got for The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, which is a film everybody has got to see. But she'd already got, that was, I think, her second Oscar. She'd already got one for Best Supporting Actress, playing Desdemona opposite Laurence Olivier in Othello, Shakespeare. So, I mean, she was a very, very talented and gifted young woman and in her earlier career. But as I say, later on, it confirms my view that you only have to live long enough in Britain and you will become a national treasure. It is just, it is age that we value more than anything else.
Well, you're not quite a national treasure yet, and I'm working You're in the right age category now.
I'm nowhere near the nearly 90, 89, I think she was, which is a good life, a good age. 89 that Dame Maggie
You've got a couple of years.
I'm glad to say. I have a few years to go. But I'm working hard at becoming a national treasure. And GB News, I think, is my platform.
That's your platform.
I'm sure many people will be putting your name forward for many more titles and letters after the end of your name. But you're not really saying that she's sort of cheapened her act towards the end of her career.
I think he was saying that.
Lots of new generations.
I mean, Alec Guinness did that.
Lots of new generations would not have been introduced
the sheer genius of Alec Guinness when he was young,
about Star Wars?
Right up to the time when he was doing, he did Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is another work for the television series, another work of absolute television genius and incomparable acting. And then he's whatever this guy, what was he called? Obi-Wan Kenobi or whatever.
Now, final word from you on this subject,
Star Wars,
Paul.
for the money.
Well, she was, my final word would be she was a good Essex girl. She was born in Ilford, which is just up the road from where I was born in Barking, and that makes anyone a decent egg in my book.
I have to say, when I first saw her in Harry Potter, I thought she was Scottish, which probably just...
Professor McGonagall,
right, exactly, which probably
she was
shows her...
Scottish in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie.
Yes, it shows her range, her reach.
Exactly.
But we're going to move on because, of course, there is so much more that has happened today and it's hard to keep up with all of it. 2 13-year-old boys have been sentenced to life with a minimum term of 8 years and 6 months. This after being found guilty for the murder of the 19-year-old Sean Seasahi in Wolverhampton last year. The pair are the youngest people convicted, the youngest convicted murderers in the UK since Jamie Bulger's killers, Robert Thompson and John Venables, back in 1993. The killers have been granted anonymity on the basis of their ages, but the horrific events beg the question as to whether parents ought to be more responsible here. Should parents be held to some extent legally responsible when minors commit crimes? Lord Moylan, Daniel, we're going to start with you. Where were the parents in this case?
I don't know where the parents were because we don't know anything about the killers, or virtually nothing about the killers, and that anonymity that is... I've spoken on this show before and I've said, I don't believe that people accused of crime should be anonymous, whatever their age, and I don't think... I think we should know their names and we should know the backgrounds and we should understand these things, because simply in the interests of open justice. But I don't see how, in practice, you can hold parents legally responsible. I mean, did they have parents? All I understand about their background is that they had chaotic backgrounds.
We understand that one of them had a much more chaotic background than the other. There was one who, as far as we understand from the sentencing that was read out live on television earlier today, there was one of the two who came from a very stable family. There was very little that was said about him other than he had dyslexia. And then the other one had a developmental trauma, had been exploited, there'd been talk of trafficking and all the rest of it. So it's sort of, there's a duality there.
Well, there is. Let's say that one of them, I don't know, we're making this up. Let's say one of them was in council care because of his background, OK? Legally, the council is the parent. That's the legal position. So does the council go to jail as a result of... If you're going to hold parents responsible, does the council have to go to jail? Are they the people who go to jail? What are we actually talking about when we say the parents are responsible? What do we mean when we're talking about orphaned kids or kids who've never seen their parents?
Well, I think a lot of people think that actually parents don't take enough responsibility.
I couldn't agree with you more about that.
Darryl has written in to say, regarding the 12-year-old murderers, the parents should serve minimum 25 years each. These killers get a slap on the wrist.
Well, I don't think that is a meaningful thing that you can actually put into place legally. While I agree with you that morally the parents have a very great responsibility to bring up their children correctly, I don't think legally this is a remotely feasible thing to do.
Paul Embry.
I think if the parents could have reasonably foreseen what was going to happen and they'd in some way been negligent or reckless in the way that they'd brought that child up and knew, for example, that a child was buying a machete and was going out with a machete or another knife, or a parent knows that his or her child is shoplifting regularly, and the parent himself or herself themselves make no intervention and take no action themselves in an attempt to try to keep the child on the straight and narrow. And if it can be demonstrated that actually the parents have been negligent in that regard, then I'm not necessarily against the idea of the law saying to the parents, actually, you are in some way culpable as well. In the same way, for example, if a dog owner doesn't keep a dog under control and lets it off the leash knowing that that dog is dangerous, knowing there's a chance that that dog is going to bite someone, we say, look, the owner, the person responsible for that animal, ultimately has to face the consequences in terms of the law. Not, by the way, let me say, not that I'm comparing children to dogs, but the analogy I'm drawing is that sometimes you can be held responsible. I think you should be held responsible if you are ultimately in control of someone and are that person's parent in this case. And if it can be shown that you haven't intervened as a responsible adult when you ought to have done, then I can't blame the law for saying we're going to fill your collar as well.
Is that not a fair point?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I agree, and it's a very difficult case. But, the difference is that a dog can't be held culpable in front of a court. The owner is in ultimate control, as Paul used it. That isn't true of a parent with a child, and a child beyond a certain age can be held.
Beyond a certain age. So there's a sliding scale here.
No, there isn't a sliding scale. There's a cut-off. They came up with the Bulger killers when they were tried. There's an age at which you are held. The courts will hold a child responsible for their actions, and below that age, the child is not held to be responsible.
Well, who is below that age?
I can't remember what it is, but I think it's around 12 years old. And in the case of the Bulger killers, the court had to determine. Then there's a degree of discretion in between two bands where the court can.
But I suppose, Paul Embry, the state decides that below the age of 18, you can't decide to drink for yourself. You can't decide to gamble. Below the age of 16, you can't consent to sexual intercourse. And yet it's 12 for... I mean, surely these are all arbitrary numbers.
They are, and it's a really tough one. At what age does a child become totally criminally responsible, or a human become totally criminally responsible for his or her actions? Is it right just to have an arbitrary figure, bearing in mind that children develop and mature at different speeds? Is it right just to have a blanket age for everybody? I don't know. I do think that 12 should be just about below the age for complete criminal responsibility, which is why unlike Daniel, I think unless there's a compelling reason to say that the child should be named, in this case the children should be named, I don't actually think they should be named. I think if they're at the age where they do assume complete responsibility in front of the law, then I think it's absolutely right in the interests of transparent justice that they are named. I'm not convinced that this would meet that criteria. I think you probably disagree with that.
Yeah, I disagree with it as a matter of principle, but of course the point is it doesn't even apply on a reliable basis. In this case, the killers haven't been named. In the case of the Bolger killers, they were named after the trial. In the case of the
you think they should be named in this trial?
Southend,
you think they should be named in this trial?
A few weeks ago, the suspect was named even before the trial. I mean, right at the outset.
He was just days away from his 18th birthday.
Given away from his background. I agree there are different ages, but the point is that this is applied in a very flexible way. So there must be public interest reasons why there are public interest reasons why children can be named in trials. I think there's a public interest in open justice.
I suppose it all gets down to this ultimate question of, can people be reformed? Can people go into some sort of process, be reformed, change their name and go back into society? Or are these people forever? That's another thorny question which we don't have time for, I'm afraid, but we will be back looking ahead to tonight's exclusive interview with a victim of the disgraced late Harrods boss Mohammed Al-Fayed. Is the latest sex abuse scandal evidence that rich and powerful people can get away with anything? That next.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
In October, a new collection of portraits will be unveiled which record some of the most impactful women of modern times, including Elizabeth Taylor in her role as Cleopatra, Beyoncé, Princess Diana and Veronica Lake. The pieces were created in tandem by the artistic duo Sequin K and Jerry Kinch, and they join me now. Jerry, tell us a bit about how you got into making these portraits.
Yeah, so Sequin and I have been walking in and out of each other's lives for like 9 or 10 years now, and although our art is very different to my art, we've always sort of said we'll do something together, you know. I mean, our work with crystals is so different to my traditional oil painting, and it's like, you know, they say the East is East and West is West and never the twain shall meet, but we kind of proved an exception to that rule, and we've done something here quite unique, you know. Painting's been my whole life, you know, ever since I was a child, you know. It's been something that's always kept me in good stead, you know. It's something that I think jumped over from my grandfather. He was a painter of the churches in Ireland, and ever since I was a child I just painted naturally, and you know, it's always been a way for me to earn a living as well.
Sequin, as I speak to you, I hope we're going to reveal a portrait that has been brought in. This is a 6-foot portrait of Veronica Lake. And to Jerry's work, you have applied what I would call sequins, Swarovski crystals. How do you apply them?
The Swarovski crystals have been applied one by one in a sort of a meditative state. And I use a syringe with the strongest glue in the world and also some little tools. And they're just placed on one by one. So it's sort of like a modern-day pointillism, I would say.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Good evening, this is Dewbs & Co with me, Tom Harwood, standing in or perhaps sitting in this evening. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about what we have been talking about, particularly should parents be held responsible for the crimes of their children? Well, John says, every time I hear the news of these two 12-year-old murders, tears come to my eyes. We need to see parents being held responsible. Adrian says these young people should be named, and 8 years is nothing for this murder. A very good point. They'll be out aged 20. Catherine, with good behaviour, of course. Catherine says parents are responsible for their kids, but Peter says, do you not realise that many of these children do not have parents? The result of a brief relationship with a father who's never been seen and a mother who has no interest in her children. Well, profound views there. Please keep them coming. But I should also mention who's keeping me company until 7 o'clock. Firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embry is to my left, and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Moylan, is to my right. See what we've done there. Serious news now. The late former Harrods boss, Mohammed Al-Fayed, has found himself in a posthumous sex abuse scandal, with many former employees and acquaintances accusing him of rape and abuses of power. Tonight at 10 o'clock, we'll be showing you an exclusive interview from Patrick Christie's with a victim of Mohammed Al-Fayed, Sarah Savogi, who has bravely agreed to tell her story.
And his name's in tatters now, isn't it? He's not remembered as the owner of Harrods. He's now remembered as a rapist and a sexual predator. And that's what he deserves, in my eyes.
Well, tune in at 10 o'clock for that. We've seen, of course, lots of shocking sex abuse scandals in recent years, several of which involve the rich and the powerful. We're asking tonight, can the rich get away with anything? Well, over to my panel. Paul Embry, is this a symptom of an untouchable class?
Yes, I've been a trade union representative and I've represented people in the workplace who have suffered abuse at the hands of, sometimes important bosses. And there is a tendency for people to turn a blind eye and to bully the victims into silence. I think it goes on in our country much more than we're allowed to know. And it needs to be dealt with. And I would say that's why trade unions are so important in the workplace. I come from a trade union background and I've seen the good that trade unions can do in terms of representing people who are at the end of that sort of treatment and challenging it in a way that the individual might not necessarily have the courage to do so, because partly they think it's going to ruin their career, or they're going to get an adverse reaction in the workplace. I mean, I generally don't like the idea of allegations being made against people when they're not in a position to defend themselves. If someone's dead, that person's not in a position to defend themselves. And generally, I tend not in those situations to take the allegations at face value. Nonetheless, I think if you look at some high-profile cases where there is such a weight of evidence, Jimmy Savile, for example, no one can realistically say, well, Jimmy Savile doesn't have the chance to defend himself, therefore, we should assume he's not guilty. And I think this, maybe not on that, well, clearly not on that sort of scale, but nonetheless, I think the weight of evidence that's being directed towards Al-Fayed suggests that these are not people who have just decided to make a fast buck by making false allegations. But nonetheless, it's appalling that someone, simply because he is rich and powerful and an owner of a particular company, can get away with this, as he clearly did for years by the looks of things, and no one challenges him. That's an indictment, unfortunately, of our society.
And Daniel, this is perhaps the most pernicious thing for victims, that time and time again, it isn't until someone's dead that actually all of this sort of stuff comes out. Isn't that a point of evidence towards the case that while these people are alive, they've got the power, they've got the influence, they've got the authority to keep all their critics at bay? It's only once they're powerless that actually this stuff comes out.
Well, there is a point there. I mean, Fayed hasn't had power in that sense for quite a number of years. He had a lot of money, but he hasn't been running Harrods. He hasn't owned Harrods for a number of years. And so any power he'd have had as a boss would have dissipated some years ago, even before he was dead. So it's interesting that it's all coming out now, and the BBC seems to have brought it to prominence through the investigations they've done. People have known about it, but it's taken a good investigative journalistic exercise to bring it all out. I mean, Fayed was getting away with stuff the whole of his life. We still to this day do not know, people forget this, we still to this day do not know where he got the money to buy House of Fraser Group, which included Harrods in those days, to buy it. We no idea where that money came from. The bank that vouched for him, Kleinwort Benson, was so disgraced when it came out that they'd gone along with this crook that the bank collapsed. It effectively came to an end. Kleinwort Benson, it was a great merchant bank, it was destroyed by this. There's a great Department of Trade inquiry report into the whole thing from 30 plus years ago. So the man has been a sort of a dodgy all of his life. And none of this really surprises me, to be perfectly frank. I'm sorry it's taken time for it to come out, and it's a huge trauma for the people who've had to suffer these attentions, which were obviously completely systematic. I mean, any woman who was in his office would have been
But Daniel, what does it say about rich and powerful people as a whole?
Well, I don't think it says a lot about rich and powerful people as a whole, because it's wrong to make the assumption that rich and powerful people are sexual predators. What it is saying, though, is that if you're a sexual predator and you are rich and powerful I think is more important than rich in this, if you are powerful in an organisation, then it is easier to get away with these things while you're in that position. Yeah.
Yeah, and Paul, I suppose the issue here is that all of the ones we hear about, well, those are the ones that we hear about. There were, of course, many millions of very rich and very powerful people who aren't sexual predators.
Absolutely true. That's absolutely true. The vast majority, are not, but some are, and some do exploit their power and their wealth to cause misery to the lives of their workforce, for their own gratification or whatever. And I think one of the wrong things that's allowed to occur is this horrible practice of non-disclosure agreements, where someone may make a complaint and essentially their silence is bought. And this is what rich and powerful people do. They reach settlement agreements with people who have made complaints against them, and they say, we'll pay you a few £1,000 and you shut up. And what that does is it allows employers to cover up bad practice. And that is something I think that we've not got our heads around. That goes on far too frequently in workplaces up and down the country. And I think we need to introduce a law to stop that sort of thing from happening.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think it makes my point. I want to make this distinction. Rich and powerful are not the same thing, OK? It's powerful. It's not that they're using their own money to pay this compensation to get an NDA. They're using the company's money to do that. It's their power within the corporation that actually allows them to get away with all of this in the vast majority of cases. Not everybody waits until they're dead, so to speak. Of course, Weinstein and Epstein in the United States were alive when the allegations were made against them. In this country, there have been allegations made against a very senior investment banker, which have been made public in the past, in the not-too-distant past, who is not dead. And so on.
It's a fair point.
And we have to draw the distinction between serious sexual harassment and what you might call kind of everyday flirting. I think most sensible people understand the distinction there. I'm not sure that some people amongst, if you like, the woke brigade necessarily understand that. I think nowadays you can innocently flirt with someone through sending a text message or something like that, and people will regard that as sexual harassment. I do think we need to be careful about regarding all sorts of interactions like that as sexual harassment, but certainly in terms of some of the stuff that we've seen in this Fayed case, no reasonable person would say that doesn't cross the line. It clearly does. It's completely unacceptable.
Now, I should say that in the past few moments, Mohammed Al-Fayed's son, Omar, has released a statement. We have it for you now. He says, "I'm horrified and deeply concerned about the allegations recently brought to light against my late father. The allegations are shocking and has thrown into question the loving memory I had of him. How this matter could have been concealed for so long raises further disturbing questions." So just to recap, while we digest that statement from Mohammed Al-Fayed's son, this evening, in a GB News exclusive, Patrick Christys will be speaking to Sarah Savogi, a victim of Mohammed Al-Fayed. That's at 10 o'clock. Only Patrick Christys tonight. GB News Live, from 9 p.m. That interview at 10. Coming up, Prime Minister Keir Starmer rounds off his trip to the US with a meeting with Donald Trump. But will his and his foreign secretary's previously, well, to put it mildly, uncharitable comments about the former president come back to haunt him and the special relationship?
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A much drier night tonight compared to last night across the south. A pretty chilly one, though, so it'll be a cold start to the weekend. For much of the weekend, the weather's set fair, but behind me, this area of low pressure will bring some wet and windy weather later on Sunday. For the time being, though, the winds are coming down from the north. That's why it's going to be chilly, bringing a few showers across Wales, southwest England, northern Scotland and along the east coast of England. But the winds here will be easing and the showers tending to fade. For many, it's a dry night with long clear spells, and that's why it's going to be quite chilly, with those temperatures tumbling down to 3 or 4 degrees, even in towns and cities. Pockets of frost likely in the countryside. So yes, a cold start to Saturday, but by and large, a cracking start, certainly for most of England and Wales. Lots of blue sky, lots of sunshine, maybe still 1 or 2 showers for Wales and southwest England, and perhaps also still coming into North Norfolk, but generally just a chilly but bright start. Not the same, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Here, more cloud will be edging in as we go through the night, and there will be, particularly for Scotland, outbreaks of rain. So we'll see a little bit of rain heading to Glasgow, and certainly on the west coast, rain on and off through the day. For eastern Scotland, though, I suspect, we may see a few showers, but generally here skies should brighten up. Some cloud will bubble up over northern England and Wales, maybe 1 or 2 showers here, the odd shower for the north coast of Northern Ireland. But for many, it's dry. And over the Midlands, much of eastern England, southern England, a fine day, a fine autumnal day, with temperatures a touch below the average for the end of September, but the winds will be lighter tomorrow compared to today. On Sunday, though, we do have to talk about the winds picking up in the southwest. A fine, bright start for many, a few showers in northern Scotland, but the winds whipping up here. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place for the coast of Wales and southwest England. Those gusty winds could cause some disruption. Rain coming in here as well, but for many, much of the day will be dry again.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Problems on the M1 in South Yorkshire continue. The southbound carriageway is partly blocked from junction 32 to 31. The M18 down to the Sheffield exit of the A57 at the scene of an accident. On the M60 in Greater Manchester, the clockwise exit is partly blocked to junction 17, the A56 exit for Prestwich at the scene of a crash. And on the A12 and Essex, the northbound carriageway partly blocked just after the Witten bypass. Emergency repair works causing queues back towards the Boreham interchange northeast of Chelmsford. On the Kent stretch of the M25, the outside lane is closed anti-clockwise. A van's broken down junction 2 at the Darren interchange, adding to the usual queues towards the Dartford tunnels. And trains have been suspended westbound Swindon to Bristol Parkway because of the flooding. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good evening, this is Dewbs & Co with me, Tom Harwood. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch about all of the stories we've been talking about this evening, not least, can rich and famous people get away with anything? Adrian says, seems to me that yet another very famous celebrity who has been protected for years. Why wasn't Al Fayed dealt with while he was alive? He did have power, obviously. Andy says, rich people can get away with anything? Yes. Whereas David says, Fayed cannot defend himself. I feel very uncomfortable about this. Why now, when he's dead? Lots and lots of thoughts on that. Keep them coming, of course. But keeping me company in the studio, along with all of your lovely comments, until 7 o'clock, of course, is firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embry and former advisor to Boris Johnson, Lord Moylan. Well, let's get on to the big American story. Yes, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer finished off his trip to the United States by meeting former President Donald Trump. Our very own political editor, Christopher Hope, spoke with Mr Trump just before their meeting. This is how that went down.
You're meeting Keir Starmer. What do you think of him? Some of his colleagues in government have been quite critical of you.
I actually think he's very nice. I think he ran a great race. He did very well. It's very early, but he's popular, and I'll be seeing him, and I'll send you regards.
Would you rather Nigel Farage would have had a bigger role?
Well, I think Nigel is great. I mean, I've known him for a long time. He had a great election, too. He picked up a lot of seats, more seats than he was allowed to have, actually. Nigel is a fantastic person.
Well, very kind words, of course, and a curious analysis of our electoral system too. Didn't expect that necessarily. But our Prime Minister has not always been so diplomatic about Mr Trump. Yes, in 2019, Starmer commented on Boris Johnson's relationship with Trump, suggesting an endorsement made him unfit to be Prime Minister. And his now Foreign Secretary David Lammy called Trump a racist KKK and Nazi sympathiser. Tell us what you really think. Well, do these comments risk coming back to haunt the new Labour government? Get your views in, of course, gbnews.com/your say. But over to my panel now. Lord Moylan, is it going to be hard for this government to work with a potential Trump administration?
No harder, I think, than it would be for any other British government to work with a potential Trump administration. I think, on the whole, politicians are pretty inured to what other politicians say about them, and they deal with matters as they arise rather than reflecting back. I mean, you have to remember, Boris made some very, very unfavourable remarks about Trump before he was elected president, but that didn't affect their relationship at all. And I imagine Starmer and Lammy will be allowed in on the assumption that they're not completely feral and given a chance to conduct themselves properly. What I think it really shows is the hypocrisy of Keir Starmer, that, you know, he says an endorsement from Trump makes you unfit to be Prime Minister. But that's only true if you're Boris Johnson. If it's Keir Starmer, you come away smiling like a Cheshire cat about the whole thing, feeling thrilled to bits about it. What a complete hypocrite the man is.
Well, on that point of hypocrisy, Paul, what did you make of this sort of? I was about to say candlelit dinner. I don't think it was candlelit, but it was. It wasn't.
The table was probably as long as this, and they were.
It was a dinner at the top of Trump Tower. Very close teams. I mean, it's a bit strange.
I think it's a good move, actually. I loathe Donald Trump on a personal level. I really dislike him intensely. But ultimately, if you're the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, you need a working relationship with someone who very possibly soon is going to be the President of the United States of America. And it is important to put behind you some of that silly social media stuff. And I'm sure Trump's done one or two things on social media in the past that are probably not particularly judicious and maybe he even might regret. But nonetheless, it was the right move. I think it raised eyebrows, but it was the right move to try to establish a rapport with someone who potentially, and some people would say likely, is going to be the next president again of the United States.
What do you make of Daniel's hypocrisy point? That both David Lammy and Keir Starmer were very critical of Boris Johnson's relationship with Donald Trump, despite the fact that, of course, the transatlantic relationship is so important, as he's now discovering in the office he holds.
I think everyone accepts, don't they, that different rules do apply a little bit on that kind of diplomacy thing when you're in the hot seat yourself. You can probably get away with saying things about foreign leaders when you're a backbench MP, or arguably when you're the leader of the opposition. But I think most people understand that the rules of the game when you become the Prime Minister change slightly. And
that's very charitable, but he wasn't charitable to Boris Johnson.
Yeah, what about saying about your own Prime Minister?
No, and to be honest, I don't think those statements that both Lammy and Starmer made in the past were particularly wise, and I suspect they probably regret them. But the point that I'm making is that I think most people accept there is a freedom that comes with not being in government and not being Prime Minister. That doesn't come through being in government and being in Prime Minister. You have to be the ultimate diplomat when you're the Prime Minister to a certain degree, and I think Starmer probably gets that. I don't defend him on everything, by the way, but probably on this, yes.
I suppose it is interesting that that Donald Trump said nice things about Keir Starmer as well. After all, he's had to make amends with many people who've said very rude things about Donald Trump in the past, not least his own vice-presidential pick, who was a virulent anti-Trumper until, of course, he became president. Well, much more to come up on today's programme. Indeed, a new study shows that Generation Z are the worst at recycling. Yes, you heard that correctly. The young, environmentally conscious group, they're the worst recyclers. Well, are they a bunch of green-eyed hypocrites?
Martin Daubney. Weekdays from 3 p.m.
Please tell me that we're British. In our darkest hour, we can work around this. The beer will still be flowing at Christmas. Tell me, please.
Martin, without using bad language, there's no words to describe that this is another major blow to the hospitality sector. I wake up every day with anxiety thinking, what's going to happen to us now? Oh my God, now the weather's against us. Not only are the government absolutely battering us, then the weather's now hitting us as well.
Kate Stewart, this can only mean one thing. Prices, once again, going through the roof.
And there's nothing we can do. We have on costs. We have to buy from the brewery. We have the VAT. We have then the VAT, what we take. It is an absolute nightmare. To be in the pub game now, Martin, is very, very difficult. And there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Everything just keeps hammering us from every different direction. And obviously, we have to pass that on to the customers, then price increases. There's nothing we can do. We don't want to sell beer at an inflated price. We want it as cheap as possible to get people through them doors. But we have no option. They're going to go up again in the new budget. You know, there's no help for us. What are we supposed to do, Martin, except the only option is to close the doors and say, enough is enough. We can't do this anymore. I absolutely cry my eyes out having to put the prices up because you think, oh, my God, people are just going to turn away and walk. But we can't swallow the costs all the time, Martin. It's impossible for us to do because we will go bankrupt. There has to be, there's inflation getting hammered on us yet again, and we have to pass it on. I feel it when I take my children out for something to eat. You're like, wow, that has just cost a fortune. But what is the answer? The answer is the government needs to look at saving the hospitality sector and stop being so greedy in everything that they take away from us, or there won't be pubs.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, this is Dewbs & Co with me, Tom Harwood. Now straight on to our next story. A study today has revealed that Generation Z are the worst at holding up recycling habits, despite being the most environmentally conscious generation. It comes as 2 Just Stop Oil activists are jailed for vandalising a priceless Van Gogh. Well, is the Gen Z green dream over? Well, over to my panel. Paul, this is pretty hard to compute. It's the people who bang on the most about being green, go on all the marches. Turns out they don't do it themselves.
You're not suggesting that they're virtue signalling, Tom, I hope? Surely not.
You use those words, not me.
It's possibly the case that they are, and it's possibly the case that they see these... You know, they have these high-status opinions, don't they? These high-status beliefs when it comes to the environment, because it projects them in a good way among their peers, because, of course, they're saving the planet and so on, and naturally we all want to do that. But surely the measure of it is that you practice what you preach, I think. You know, good things are done, as someone once said, in small particulars. And therefore, I think if you consider yourself someone who's an environmentalist, then you should be recycling, and you shouldn't necessarily be having the old boilers and the gas-guzzling cars and jetting around the planet. And it seems some people are genuine about it, absolutely no question. You know, they believe it in their heart and they live their lives according to that belief, and they're consistent. But it's when people are not consistent and they go on the rallies and the marches but don't necessarily practice it themselves, they can't then complain if they lose a bit of respect.
Lord Moylan, should we be surprised? I mean, we've all seen the aftermath of Glastonbury. We've all seen sort of any music festival and the litter that's just strewn across the landscape after it ends. These are the people that are the most vocal about this issue.
Well, it doesn't surprise me at all. Part of it is that if you're a national treasure or a potential national treasurer like me, and you've got to that age, then you were brought up in a post-war era where waste was frowned upon. And we didn't waste anything. And so when recycling came along, which was sometime later, of course, probably in the 90s when we started serious recycling, the idea that you actually, put an effort into sorting your rubbish out into different bins so it can be reused comes naturally to people of my generation. We responded very well to that. The younger generation, of course, have not been brought up in an age where you have to think about cutting down on waste and making the most of what you've got. And so they don't even think about it. And besides, they're so terrified, I feel, of the planet coming to an end tomorrow.
Can I say, normally when I hear a Tory peer talk about cutting down on waste, I break out in a rash because I know what's coming next.
Well, I think not that kind of waste.
I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
So
on this occasion.
Try and distract things and explain why the public sector unions should have more and more staff and more members and more income.
There we go. I've wound him up sufficiently.
Which was not actually what we were meant to be discussing. But what I was saying is, if you genuinely believe the planet's could come to an end tomorrow, why would you recycle? Well, that's not going to save anything.
This is the Greta paradox.
You're up there now in the celestial sphere. You're worried about the end of the world. We were worried about, what rubbish dumps beginning to...
Paul, this is just... We've got very little time, but is there a horseshoe here of those that don't believe in climate change and those who think it's too late to do anything about climate change? I mean, they might as well both give up.
I think Daniel's hit on a really good point, which I hadn't considered before, actually. If people are so obsessed with telling us what we should be doing when the planet's going to end next week or whenever, then there's a certain inconsistency there, isn't there?
Well, I just like the fact that when I used to be in my former job reporting in Westminster, when Extinction Rebellion sat in Westminster and sort of shut down the whole area, the easiest stories to write were always just to go out with a camera once they'd gone away and just see the strewn litter all the way across Parliament Square. Always an easy story, always easy clicks. Well, that's all we've got time for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Paul Embry and Lord Moylan as well. And I have to say that you shouldn't go anywhere because, of course, up next is the inimitable Mr. Lee Anderson MP. That next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A much drier night tonight compared to last night across the south. A pretty chilly one, though, so it'll be a cold start to the weekend. For much of the weekend, the weather's set fair, but behind me, this area of low pressure will bring some wet and windy weather later on Sunday. For the time being, though, the winds are coming down from the north. That's why it's going to be chilly, bringing a few showers across Wales, southwest England, northern Scotland and along the east coast of England. But the winds here will be easing and the showers tending to fade. For many, it's a dry night with long clear spells, and that's why it's going to be quite chilly, with those temperatures tumbling down to 3 or 4 degrees, even in towns and cities. Pockets of frost likely in the countryside. So yes, a cold start to Saturday, but